So thank you so much for joining us on our first ever outspoken town hall. Of course, I had to do it with Father Calvin Robinson, the man who quit GB News in principle after what happened to both myself and Lawrence Fox. And I actually wanted to start, Calvin, by reading out a really brilliant comment that we received from one of my outspoken subscribers, Mary Critchen, because I thought it was just a perfect start. And she said, many of us conservatives have had a difficult time watching the unjust treatment of many do gooders in the world who bravely represent our views on the front line in the media. When Dan and Calvin were removed from air, it was a huge blow. Seeing them reunite will be a small representation of Easter for me and will bring great joy. The evil leftist powers took them down, and they have stayed strong and true and pushed the rock aside and are walking again, reborn. Love you guys. Glad you are back. And Calvin, I have to say, the support from our viewers over the past 6 months has been phenomenal, hasn't it?
I love that. Thank you for reading that. That was wonderful. And yes, I mean, the viewers, we wouldn't be able to get through it without them, would they? They have been our support, our backbone, and they've remained with us throughout, which just goes to show it's not the platform that matters, it's the people. And that means both the presenters and the community together, we make one. I love it.
That's true. There were some dark moments, though. I'm not going to lie. Calvin came around to my house with a couple of bottles of wine in those dark days after the suspension from GB News, when earlier in the week I'd had the media camped outside our house. But I do think, Calvin, actually, for both of us, in different ways, this has provided a real opportunity, right?
Oh, absolutely. I feel liberated. You know, in all honesty, it was stifling. The not just the Ofcom over your shoulder, but the pressure of that place and the vibe of it was negative towards people who are not in line with the mainstream narrative. And I was so pleased to be freed from that and able to say what I like without liberal producers telling me I'm doing something wrong, or someone calling me. And actually, it helped me learn who I can rely on, who my friends are, and what
Yeah.
and who actually cares about these issues. Not the people who sit next to me on the sofa and say they care about them, but who really cares about these issues.
Well, look, Calvin, we have had the most incredible questions from outspoken members. Plus, I want to give you the opportunity, if you're watching live, to be able to join in. So start thinking of your questions, raise your hands, and I'll be trying to share your video shortly. So let's get through, Calvin. We've got to start, before we talk about politics and religion and everything, I think we've got to start talking about GB News, because you can imagine quite a lot of questions did come in on that front. Some of them are quite fun, though. So Richard asks, I would like to ask you both how the experience of the last number of months has changed you, both as people. And were many of your former GB News colleagues supportive in private, or did they hang you both out to dry? Were there any surprises? And Richard says, feel free to name names. And we will,
He
because we're
does.
now unleashed, aren't we? So, Calvin, do you want to start? Who disappointed you?
Oof. Well, I will say, before I stepped out, I had a phone call. I tried to rally the troops. I called a lot of our co-presenters and co-panelists, and I said, look, what's happening is not good. What's happened to Lawrence is awful, but it looks like they're going to do the same to Dan. If they do, we should step out, shouldn't we? And people were like, yeah, of course we should. Yes, we should. And then, of course, it happened and you were suspended. And so I stepped out. And then I looked behind me and nobody else was there. And these people, a lot of them do remain in their own way supportive privately. But I mean, you've been much more charitable to people than I have on this. I've been massively let down by these people. I think a lot of them are charlatans, actually, because they put their career and their ambitions before their friendships and before their principles too. And I think that speaks volumes. I don't need to name names because people can see that what the very, very few people who stood up publicly for either me, you, or Lawrence, and they can compare that with the list of people that still go on that channel, still present on that channel, and still have the goal to call themselves truth seekers and freedom fighters.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am slightly more accommodating than you. Simply, in the way that I do know how tough it is for some folk to be able to put food on the table. And for me, it was more about private support. If you were prepared to support me privately and explain why it was necessary for you to keep going on, then I totally understood. And I'd put people like Adam Brooks in that category. I was also really heartened by some of the presenters who were prepared to support me publicly. So in that category, I would put Bev Turner and Nana Acquare and Neil Oliver. But a large number, obviously, of people were very disappointing. I think probably the one that upset me most actually was Michelle Dewberry because she went on Good Morning Britain, and I was really at my lowest point then because what had happened was such an overreaction. And she went on Good Morning Britain. And Calvin, I know that she used to watch our show every night with her husband, Simon Jordan, because she would tell me, we sit down, we watch for 2 hours every night. She met my mum at the GB News barbecue. I'd sat down with her and spoken for her about an hour about all of the false allegations and everything that was happening to me. And she just didn't say one word when Ben Shepherd was piling into me, because Ben Shepherd's never liked me, now the host of This Morning. She didn't say one word to say, look, Dan's been going through a really tough time. We should cut him some slack. He's a good person, nothing. And at a time when I was incredibly low, Calvin, I cannot tell you how hard watching that interview was.
Well, it seems to me, looking at it, that she was doing the rounds, and she'd been told to do the rounds by upper management. She was pretty much towing the party line and being the representative for the institution, and that meant going against you, unfortunately. And I assume
Mm.
she did so for her own career. I have no qualms in saying that I've never trusted her or never liked her as a presenter or a freedom fighter or a truth teller, because I've seen her as a careerist. She invited me onto her show a long while ago, and I had a debate with a raving lefty, and I hardly ever got to speak. But when I did, I tried to put the lefty right. And when we came off air, Michelle had a go at me and said, how dare you, treat my guests like that?" I'm like, well, we're here to have a debate, and I always try to debate reasonably. But she was very much about appearances, how she was perceived, and I think it's a great shame when people are like that.
Darren Donaldson, now he's a founding member, very good guy. And he says, my question for both of you is, if you both knew your last appearance on GB News was going to actually be your last appearance, is there anything you would have loved to have said on air as a parting shot?
No, I always did anyway. I called out things on air that I probably shouldn't have done. I called out the fact that we still had a diversity quota. We had to have a woman and a man. We probably had to have try to have a white person and a black person. We had to have these diversity quotas and things like that. I called that out on air. Whenever I saw something inappropriate, I did, and I didn't really get into too much trouble for those things. So
No, I wouldn't have actually said a parting shot, but I think it was particularly cruel to not allow me to say goodbye to our viewers, Calvin, because I think something that the GB News management probably missed is that we built GB News from the ground up. I mean, you were there with me on the slideshow presentations when this show and this channel was just a concept, and you were there through all of the rehearsals. And that family of viewers was strong. It was powerful because they knew what we'd been through at the start. They knew that we were pilloried and mocked, and people tried to say that GB News was going to be a failure, but they didn't care because they knew it was the establishment trying to shut this thing down. And the viewers stuck with us week after week, month after month. And by the end, Calvin, even though we didn't know it was the end, our show was the number one show on the channel. We had replaced Farage. We beat the BBC News and Sly News every night. We got so many more ratings than Talk TV and Piers Morgan's show. And I just wanted to say thank you. That's what I'm so sad about. I just wanted to have an opportunity to say thank you to everyone. And so I think it was sad that I didn't get that opportunity. Beverly Morris Beadle, Calvin says, "Hi Dan, I'm not. I'd love to know what you really thought about some of your wokey panelists. I think you already know what many of us thought about Amy Turnip and Benji Butterball. What did you think of them, Calvin? Really?"
I didn't understand. My thoughts. You've known my thoughts all along. I didn't understand why we had to have those people on. It didn't make much sense to me. The viewers
The
hated them.
Ofcommunist, that's why.
Oh, I mean, when how upset I was when I had to sit next to Albiam and Kona, for example, because I think
I
Some
would
of
make you do that regularly.
some of their views I think are wrong, and that's fine. But some of their views I think are actually wicked. You know, this whole transing of children and mutilating their bodies and saying it's okay. And of course, me and Rebecca had debates about abortion. I just think some things make me uncomfortable. And when I have people like Narinda screeching in my ear, it's just I don't think it's good TV. I think the best conversations when we were all at the nuance and like people like me and when you had Dawn on your panel, like we'd agree and we'd disagree on a lot of stuff, but it wasn't a
Mm.
massive, it wasn't a massive fight.
Well, see, I would say, and I know a lot of people won't like to hear this, but Amy Nicole Turner, great person. She's actually been very supportive of me
Yes.
behind the scenes over the past few months. So has Narinda, which will surprise a lot of people. I think um, there's some other good people. Obviously, very disappointed with Rebecca Reed. Calvin had been with us on that show for such a long time because what some people might not know is she was actually the one who sparked the whole issue with Ava Santina. She sent the video to. I was gutted about that, Calvin, because Rebecca had known what I was going through, and I don't think she necessarily realized what the firestorm she was going to create. But gosh, that was disappointing.
It was disappointing. I loved working with Rebecca. She was like my work wife. We disagreed on a lot, but we managed to do it amicably. Not at the start, but we got into a comfortable relationship.
Yeah,
And I think the problem is just that, and I think she'd agreed with this because I've called her this. I've said this to her face. I think she's just very mature. She's like a grown girl. She's not like a woman. And I think she was giggling and gossipy and thinking, "Oh, I'm going to tell Ava Santina what they've just said." It was like it's like a high school girl mentality. I don't think she was thinking to get you in trouble. I think she was like, "That's my friend. How dare Lawrence say that about my friend?" You know, it was
I
just
know. I don't think she really knew what she'd unleashed. And actually, I'm looking at some of the live questions. Jan Kitching just asked about the Rebecca Reed thing and said, why has nobody questioned her integrity and loyalty? And why has she got away scot-free still spouting her rubbish on the channel? Or was she just a useful idiot? I do think there are a lot of useful idiots, Calvin, who don't want to be there, who hate the channel, but they want to take the money, don't they? But
yeah.
look,
But
sorry.
on that note, just the integrity thing, when I built my show, I specifically built it around two people. One was Emma Webb and one was Rebecca Reed. I wanted to have a reasonable lefty that I could have debates with and conversations with and still apply the Ofcom rules. And I wanted to have someone to have my back like Emma. And Rebecca turned it down because she said, "Oh, my agent said it won't look good." I built a whole show around her, and she thought that her image might be tarnished by being associated with me. So from that point on, I thought, okay, maybe I haven't got her completely right.
No, indeed, she was a big disappointment. Look, we're going to try and go to our live outspoken membership now. So put your hand up if you would like to talk. So first up, we've got Marky Flannery, and Marky, can you hear us, or is it Marcy actually? Maybe.
You might have to unmute him.
Yes, you're going to have to unmute Marcy.
There we go.
What's your question, Marcy?
I'm sorry. I actually didn't have a question. I apologize. And it is Marcy. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful.
But I do want to say I miss you both. And I literally hardly ever watch GB News anymore. I mean, my viewing time has just gone down to nothing.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that. Well, thank you, Marcy. Great to have you here. Ems has got her hand up now. Ems, do you have a question?
Em's unmute.
I think you just need to unmute yourself, Ems.
Oh, sorry. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, do you feel disappointment in the way journalism has gone on a whole? Do you feel that it's declined massively in regards to probably how you started out?
I mean, I really do. For me, Ems, it was over the pandemic. You know, I was so let down by these colleagues in the mainstream media who I believed would question authority and would ask the right questions of power. And instead, I saw them give in to terrible propaganda, partly, by the way, because they were getting a big paycheck from the government to keep their newspapers in print. And that's when I was disillusioned. It was when I made the decision to leave the News UK Murdoch empire, where I was executive editor of The Sun, and come to GB News because I was so let down. I will say, though, Calvin, talk radio, where we were both on during 2020, was an oasis of common sense. And I was given huge leeway on talk radio to ask questions of authority, but I don't think much of the rest of the MSM did.
No, I agree. I think without talk radio, we wouldn't have known a lot of stuff that we know about COVID, the lockdowns, the vaccines, the whole lot. The conversations were had much better than anywhere else. But even there were restrictions on what could be said. There haven't been many times in the media that I've been explicitly told you cannot talk about this. But throughout COVID, talk, there's lawyers said you cannot mention the vaccines. And maybe that's because they knew my views on them, but who knows? But all of this question is important because...
Well, when you were at talk radio, they said that, did they?
Yep. When I had my common sense crusade on talk radio before I moved it to GB News, the lawyer said, look, you can't talk about the vaccines.
Interesting, because I have to say, talk never tried to constrain my freedom of speech during that year, including about the vaccine. We've got some brilliant politics questions that have come in, Calvin. So Annie Fox asks, despite it being mentioned in the news every day and seemingly a lot of Tories and members of the public wanting it, added to the number of no confidence letters already in, will the Tories finally have the guts to drop Rishi and get a new leader before the next election, or are they resigned to it all being over?
I don't know if it takes guts to get rid of Rishi. I think many of them want to get rid of Rishi. Will it make a difference? I don't think so. I don't know who they've got that could be better than him. I think they're all equally poor, to be honest. It's not going to make much of a difference anyway. Unless it was Boris, there's no person I can think of that could potentially win the next election for them. They are going to lose it. It's just about how much.
I think it is utterly pathetic, though, that they are not prepared to depose a man who has lied, who is a big fat fake, who is a globalist, who is pursuing an agenda which actually is not at all conservative and is not at all putting Britain first. Come on, Calvin.
Yeah, but who should replace
this? Is the last throw of the dice. Well, do you know what? I'm very critical of the Conservative Party, but there are good people within it, Calvin. So I will happily give a couple of names. I would be very happy with Suala Braverman or Priti Patel as leader of the Conservative Party. I think they are true conservatives. I think they would put up a good fight before the next election. And what is there to lose? And actually, look, nothing's going to stop a Labour government, but this is about stopping 10 or 15 years of Labour.
But the thing is, they are conservatives, and Miriam Cates is another one. We can name probably on one hand the number of conservatives, but it wouldn't matter because if one of them got in, they'd do exactly what they did to Liz Truss. They'd get them out straight away because it's a power game with them, and they're all wets.
I know. I do often say, actually, when it comes to Boris Johnson, remember, he didn't ever want to lock down the country, but he knew that if he had tried to advocate a policy position like we were advancing that year, Calvin, Great Barrington Declaration, shielded protection, that sort of thing, he would have been out. He would have been out on his ear. Hannah writes, is the countryside racist?
No. Countryside is beautiful. It's wonderful. Go and spend some time out there, get some fresh air, have a nice walk. The only thing that can be racist is people. And I don't think people are very often racist in this country, other than the hard left who assume things like the countryside can somehow be racist. And what they're saying is the countryside is too white, really, because they are self-haters. They don't like to see white people in a predominantly white country, which to me seems insane. Like, would these people go to Africa and say, this place is too black? I doubt it, which makes you question what their motives are to begin with.
Lucy's with us now. Lucy, unmute yourself. And do you have a question?
Oh, hi. I can't believe I'm actually speaking to you. I love you so much.
Oh my God. This is so exciting for me too. Isn't this amazing, Calvin?
Love it.
Where are you, Lucy?
Where am I?
Yeah, which city or town?
Nottingham, unfortunately.
Lovely. Oh, I like Nottingham.
It's a stupid question, really. I wondered if we'll be seeing any Kim Woodburn on your new show.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Because the thing about Kim, she doesn't give a damn.
She doesn't give a damn. Amazing.
And do you know what? They're so terrified after everything that happened with Lawrence and Shaggate and all of that. They're so terrified to have those sorts of guests now on GB News. And the great thing is, now I am unregulated. So I've got my Outspoken show coming later this year. No regulation from Ofcom. Like Calvin said earlier, I'm not going to have far left people on the panel just for the sake of it, because there is no need to do that fake faux balance required by the Ofcommunists. So absolutely, I will have Kim on the panel. Thank you so much, Lucy. And if you do want to ask any questions, then please do raise your hand. But we've got some really brilliant ones from earlier, Calvin. So Chris Harley asks, do you think the Conservatives will be able to recover after their big loss at the next general election? And I think that's sort of the point that I'm talking to. It depends how big the loss is, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's going to take at least 2 general elections for them at this point. They're going to get demolished this year if we have an election, and they're going to have to take some time to figure out what it means to be conservative, what kind of leadership they want. That's going to take longer than 5 years. They'll be scrambling for the next election. They'll fall in that one too. But the next time around, they might have a chance. But the question is, by that time, what state will the country be in?
Indeed. Okay. We have Edwin Del Carpio with us. And Edwin, I believe you were one of my founding members in what was it? Remind me what state it was in. Seattle. You're in Seattle, aren't you? You need to unmute, Edwin.
I love the live interaction.
There you are, Edwin. You're in Seattle, aren't you?
Oh, you've remuted yourself, Edwin.
Sorry, that may have been me.
Edwin, yeah. So, which faction of individuals do you think is worse? The left in the UK or the left in the USA?
Really interesting, but I genuinely think it is in the UK, Calvin. I do. I feel like, obviously, you've got the Squad in America, which is quite a malignant force, but a lot of Democrats are not as crazy as our leftists here. I don't know, Calvin, do you disagree?
Oh, it's a hard one. The Democrats are destroying the country when you look at places like California, but at the same time, the lefties over here want to implement their own globalist communist system too. So I suppose it's probably a draw, a tie between the two. I mean, leftism is a mental disorder at this point. If you look at what's happening in the world and you still support these leftist values, then something must be wrong, surely.
Couple of quick fire questions. Tracy Collins, this is on via the live chat, says, is Megyn Kelly going to be a guest on your shows? I think she is great. Absolutely she is. And Calvin, I should big up a couple of other folk actually, because it's easy to be negative, isn't it? But as well as you, the other 2 people who immediately quit GB News because of our treatment, refused to ever appear again, were Megyn Kelly and Samantha Markle. 2 great American freedom fighters, and I want to big them up, actually. And Mal asks, where has David Starkey gone on GB News? We miss him loads. Well, do you know what, Calvin? I was actually told that he's pretty much banned from GB News now because he raised Lawrence Fox on air once, and they were so horrified about it. So all of the good people are going. I hope to get David Starkey on this show, actually.
Well, viewers might remember one of the few shows that had him on regularly was my show, because a lot of the other producers wouldn't want him on air, unfortunately.
Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, now look, we've got to talk Scotland, Calvin, because obviously what's going on there is a big passion of mine, and it's something I will continue to cover.
Now I feel like I'm on Dan Wootton tonight.
Well, Karen McFeely says, what do you think of this new hate crime law in Scotland, which comes into force on April the 1st? And on a similar note, David Pybus, and I will get you to answer both of these at once, Calvin, says, do you think J.K. Rowling would have a case for hate crimes against her if the new Scottish hate laws were implemented in England?
Yes, she would. However, as we know, these laws are always one-sided and biased, so nobody would care. The police wouldn't care, the judiciary wouldn't care, so nothing would happen with it. I've tried this myself just to make a point when I got racially abused by the Race Charity Trust. Nobody cared. Whereas if it's the other way around, everyone cares. And the thing with Scotland is it's so dangerous, because we heard when they were first putting this together that someone who preaches the Christian gospel in their own home, if someone else is in their home and finds it offensive, they could file a hate crime against that person. So it's risking not just free speech in the public square, but free speech in your private home. I don't know what's worse than that.
James Sanderson asks, I have always thought that the disastrous proportional representation system at Holyrood is blimminal as it allows the tail to wag the dog all too often. But should we want a PR system for UK elections, or are we better sticking with decisive government with first past the post remaining in place? Well, look, Calvin, I think my answer will surprise a lot of folk because most conservative commentators in this country are very much on the first past the post train. I am not. I am absolutely not. I am a big believer in proportional representation. And folk who say this is just going to usher in an era of left-wing government, they've got it wrong. They've got it wrong, Calvin. I'm from New Zealand. New Zealand has proportional representation. It was introduced in the mid-90s. Now, what happened is there were parties to the left, yes, like the Green Party, who can pull a left-wing government to the more extreme policy. But there are also great parties on the right. So in New Zealand, you have the Nigel Farage type character, Winston Peters. He's currently Deputy Prime Minister. You have the classically liberal and economically conservative ACT Party on the right. And personally, I think the big tent approach of the Conservative Party isn't working. If we had PR, you'd have Reform in Parliament, but you'd also probably have the New Conservatives in Parliament. You might have a Red Wall Party in Parliament led by Lee Anderson.
Well, I agree with you. I think what we saw in 2015 when Nigel Farage earned 12.6% of the vote and got a single MP in Parliament.
Oh, yeah.
A disgrace. Whereas if
it's anti-democratic.
Right. If we had PR, we'd have a number of UKIPers in Parliament right now. Yes, we'd have some Greens and some loony lefties, but actually, we've got loony lefties running the country anyway. So it wouldn't make much difference. At least we get some right people into.
Well, exactly. You're so right, because the problem is when you have just two big parties, it means they're all a blancmange. Our parties are the same. We have two centre-left major parties. Sue has her hand up. Sue, unmute yourself, please. And what is your question for us?
Hi, Dan. I'm being Scottish, and I've got this. I've got a naughty dog here at the moment. But my question is, can't we just overload the Scottish system with complaints and bring it to its knees?
What do you reckon, Calvin?
I think so, yes, actually. Because if we look at what the police's priorities are, even in England already, they're prioritizing hate crimes and social media content above actual real crime. And so if we just flood them with rubbish, which the left seem to do quite effectively, one of the reasons Lawrence got fired in the first place is because Carol Vorderman put a tweet out saying, please complain on this link, and 8,000 people did. Not that those particular people were watching the show in the first place, but we can do the exact same. We've got to use the left's mentality against them and say, okay, if you guys want to implement this hate crime bill that says we can no longer have our own opinions without the government impeding on them, let's all file hate crimes against people that think Christianity is wrong, or that British values are wrong, or Scottish values are wrong. Let's flood the system. You're right. Good idea, Sue.
The problem is, Calvin, actually, I think the police like this hate crime bill in Scotland because it's very easy, isn't it, to go and find someone who's tweeted something nasty about a trans person. It's much harder to find someone who's broken into your house or who has mugged you. And that's what makes me so angry. We can't get police to keep our streets safe, to keep our homes safe from home invaders. But they will waste their time on this sort of rubbish.
Yeah, police don't want to police anymore, but I don't think it's their fault. I think they've been politicized as a force. I think the police commissioners need to go, the metropolitan mayors need to go, and the government need to give the police back the power to do some proper policing. Burglaries, thefts, knife crime, all of that stuff that's been skyrocketing. Solve that. Get onto those demeanors and crimes and stop worrying about what we're saying on Twitter or CCTV rubbish. If I may, I just saw that Gina put a comment, is Kinsey Schofield a friend or foe? Kinsey is wonderful. We love Kinsey. She's great.
Yeah, a couple of other little ones like that. Debbie Innes says, will you have any of your old panelists on your new platform as guests? I miss Christine Hamilton, Jim Davison, and Charlie Lawson. Absolutely. Christine has been an absolute gem, actually. Christine and Neil Hamilton had me around to their house. They are really good people, and she's been dropped. I mean, how crazy are they? Why would they drop Christine Hamilton? She was like the greatest panelist. I loved having her on the show. And Steve Field says, Calvin, is it true Pratchett Christus and Mark Dolan were fighting for your 9 p.m. slot as soon as you got suspended? Calvin, I'd say they were fighting for it
long before that.
time before. Right.
Yeah, we know it's true. We said all along that Patrick was going to get that gig, and then when we saw Mark jump in your grave, it was very clear that management had a tactic there to let Mark take all of the heat, all of the stick, all the flack, and then remove him after a few weeks, put Patrick in, and let Patrick have a smooth sailing. And everyone's like, "Oh, we love Patrick. He's a cheeky chappy," and he gets away with it.
Well, Joe says, are you mad at Patrick for taking your spot? I kind of like him, but wow, he was on 24/7 at one point. Look, I just think what was sad about the Patrick thing is that I got him his job at GB News and I got him his job at Talk Radio. So I just would have liked to have had a little bit of communication there. He's a very ambitious guy. Personally, I think it's a bit of a case of too much too soon. You know, he's 30 years old, and as you say, he's never off the tally. But look, we've got a couple more questions coming in live. Richard, can you unmute, please? This is Richard Mathams. Where are you, Richard?
Hi, Dan. Yes, I'm in Epping in Essex. So great.
Love it. My mum was born in Essex. She's listening.
Well, first of all, great to see you both. It's like the world has returned to its normal axis again. Fantastic. But my question is in your opinions, will Trump win in November? And if so, given that we'll probably have a Labour government, what will that mean for UK-US relations?
That's such a fascinating question. I was actually having lunch yesterday with someone who's doing a bit of work on the US-UK trade deal. And they think actually there's a softening of the Labour position because obviously for so long they've been so anti-Trump, haven't they? I mean, Sadiq Khan had the Trump blimp. I mean, yes, I think he's going to win. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Labour navigate that. Calvin, there has been talk of Nigel Farage being appointed as some sort of trade envoy, which could be sensible. It could be a sensible move because actually he would want to make the trade deal happen, even though there would be a Labour government in power. But personally, I think Keir Starmer is one of those careerists. You know, I call him slippery Starmer. So as soon as the election's over, I think he'll cozy up to Donald Trump.
Absolutely. And I think there's this is high stakes. If Donald Trump wins, there's a chance that America can turn around the mess that it's in and fix the situation. If Donald Trump loses, and if he loses to Biden again, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it could even end up in civil war. It's that dire right now. In terms of our relationship, yeah, I think you're right. Farage envoy could be a good idea. I'm sure he'd love it. I'm sure he would love to get back into the establishment. I worry if Labour wins. I think if Trump wins and Labour wins, America might become an attractive offer for a few years, actually.
And of course, this is the really interesting question about Farage. And I'm doing a lot of reporting now for Outspoken on the political situation. So I spoke to him the other day. He genuinely hasn't made up his mind about what he's going to do. But the Trump factor is a big one, Calvin, because I think it's the main reason why he's not so keen to necessarily re-enter British politics, because if Trump's elected, then all of a sudden there's big opportunities potentially in America for him.
No, it's not that. Farage gets paid big bucks at GB News. It's very comfortable. He turns up, does his thing. You know, he goes to Boysdale, gets drunk, gets in the cab, gets over to GB News, gets on air for a couple of hours, and then goes back to Boysdale's. It's a nice life. It's cushy. He will only get back into politics if it's more worth his time than what he's currently doing. And at present, it wouldn't be. And this is why he's only the honorary president of Reform, so that he's got a foot in the camp in case he is tempted to go back. But of course, he's far enough away to say, actually, it's nothing to do with me. It's all Richard Tice.
Well, and of course, there's a big question too about the Ofcommunists, because I think the Ofcommunists are coming for Nigel, and there's a chance he'll actually have to stand down from that honorary position. But look, you heard it here first from me. I think if Nigel enters the election race, Calvin, he will only do it in the 6-week so-called purdah period before the next election. That's when it becomes very difficult for mainstream broadcasters in the UK to say anything party political, because they literally have like a stopwatch out. But actually, that's going to be a great time for our shows, isn't it, Calvin? Because we can say absolutely whatever we want. Chi, where are you calling from, Chi?
I'm calling from Norfolk.
Oh, lovely to have you. And do you have a question for us?
Well, actually, you pretty much covered about Farage. I actually wanted to say something about Farage because he was
what's your thoughts of him?
Well, he was actually one of those who first commented about the Lawrence Fox situation. and he was pretty much against it. And although he didn't really mention you, I think, directly, but I had a feeling that, I don't know, he was totally against you, maybe, in association with Lawrence. But I just heard you said that you actually spoke with him the other day, so sounds like
Yeah,
you have a good.
I think, Calvin, is it fair to say that he was quite tough on you and Lawrence publicly? He said that you weren't team players, which I thought was really harsh.
Yeah, he threw us under the bus in order to protect his position, and I think, well, fair play to you. You know, if your careers and your ambitions are more important than everything else, then fine. But I thought it was quite a terrible stance to make, because I thought if he wanted to stand by truth and free speech, he should have said, well, what happened to Lawrence was wrong, what happened to Dan was wrong, and certainly what happened to Calvin was wrong too. But he didn't. He said, well, they were in the wrong. They were lobbing grenades. What grenade did I lob? Please. I have no time for people like that. It was just snaky behavior.
Now, Calvin, of course, this weekend, it's a very important one for you in the calendar. It is Easter. And so we've got some questions on a religious theme that I want to put to you now. So John Clark asks, what does Calvin think is the future of the Church of England, who are now basically another political party and, in my mind, have ceased to be a religious society?
Yes, I think the Church of England see themselves that way too. I think they are the opposition party quite often when they're challenging the government in the way that they're challenging the government with partisan politics. They're forgetting their place, which is to lead souls to Christ, really. That's it. What's going to happen to them, I reckon, within the next half a century, they'll cease to exist, if they even last that long. But then what position will the country be in the next 50 years anyway? I will probably be an Islamic country by then, so there'll be no point with the Church of England.
Jane Noble Knight asks, says, I see similarities between Calvin and Gavin Ashenden, the Queen's former chaplain. They both seem rooted in the real world while living their values. Is Justin Welby beyond redemption? And is there anything Calvin sees in him that suggests he might at some point see the light?
Thank you, firstly, for that comparison. Gavin Ashenden has been a good friend and a mentor of mine over the years. Justin Welby, look, I do think he's well-intentioned. I really do. I think he's misguided. I think he's surrounded in that Westminster bubble, as many politicians and journalists are. I don't think he gets the real world. I don't think he gets real people. And so I think he's always trying to appease people and trying to appeal to the masses. And he thinks, well, what do people care about? Reparations, Black Lives Matter? Yeah, of course, let's jump on that bandwagon. And he's got bad advisors around him. If he just stayed out of the press for a couple of years and focused on building the church up, because the church has been in decline since the 1920s and it's sped up under his remit. If he stopped doing what he's doing, focused on getting bums in pews and making sure there are enough priests around the country to see to every parish, he'd do a much better job than what he's doing now. But yes, there is hope for him, and I pray that he comes around.
Okay, so have you softened your stance a little bit on Welby?
I don't know if I've softened it. I mean, I don't necessarily think he's a bad guy. I just think he does bad things. I think he's confused and misguided. He needs support. He needs good people around him. And I don't think he has that.
Do you think he's part of the globalist agenda?
That could be part of the problem, actually. If he is, because I've seen he has a profile on the WEF website. So maybe the kind of people he's surrounded by are these young world leaders, these young global leaders. And that's not someone a cleric needs to be associating with, really. He should be around good Christians who can hold him accountable and make sure he's sticking to the Gospels.
Joe writes, this is one for Calvin specifically. We have seen a lot of changes in the Church of England and how it is conducting itself. Do you feel like they are worshipping a different God?
Sometimes I do. And sometimes I just feel like they've lost the guidebook. They've lost the Bible itself. And so they see, oh, well, as long as we're all nice, that's all that matters. That Jesus just told us to love each other. That's what we're doing. Well, yes, he did tell us to love our neighbor, but he also told us how to do so. He gave us, the New Testament is there to guide us, to help us follow him. And without it, we're lost. And I think so often people in the Church of England, especially the hierarchy, rely on their own intellect, rely on their own interpretation, and forget to resort back to the Bible, revert back to the Bible. And if they did that more often, we'd all be in a better place. So yeah, it's well-intentioned, well-meaning, but wrong direction.
Okay, so of course, raise your hands if you want to speak to Calvin and us live, and do make sure that you unmute. We have Sir Daniel on now. Sir Daniel, I bow down to you. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from the magnificent city of York.
Oh, I love York. Great to have you. Do you have a question for us?
Yes, I do, gents. And firstly, fantastic to see you and to welcome your new platform, Dan.
Thank you.
But the obvious thing that springs to me is, do either of you have ambitions to step forward into the front line of politics?
Oh, I definitely don't. I definitely don't. Because I think there's much I can do actually as a broadcaster and a journalist. And I think one of the problems, Calvin, near the end with GB News is there's too many politicians. So there's Nigel, there's Jacob Rees-Mogg, there's Lee Anderson, but Jubes was a Brexit Party candidate as well. You have run before, though, haven't you, Calvin?
Yes, I was also a Brexit Party candidate. I was one of the people that Nigel Farage stood down. And actually, it took me a long time to get over that and forgive him for that, because I thought we could have made a big impact. All of those candidates had a lot of support, and we could have changed politics for good. We could have broken down that two-party system, but he stood us down. And I believe it was because he was promised a seat in the House of Lords. And then Boris reneged on that. I think Farage has been bitter about it ever since. However, would I stand again? No. I thought at the time that that was a good way to change things. I always tell people, if you don't like what you see, stand up and make a difference. And I do think politics is a tool people can use, but I feel like I have more of an impact and make more of an influence in the media than I would in politics. And I think it would stifle me, and I'd probably resent it. I don't think it's a good environment.
Okay, some quick fire questions that are coming in live, so feel free to ask yours in the Q&A box if you are watching live. Mr. Wayno asks, hi Dan, do you keep in touch with Mark Steyn? I do actually. We've been messaging quite a bit. His health is not good, and I'm really worried for him on that front. I was always a big supporter of Steyn, just like Calvin did over me. I had tried to rally the troops time and again over Mark Steyn. I lobbied management. Look, I'm not going to lie, part of it was for selfish reasons. He provided an amazing lead-in to my show at 9 o'clock at night, and I needed that. But I also believed he was such an important voice to have on the channel. I fully support him taking on the Ofcommunist. He's got this court case coming up in June, and I'd really like to talk to him about it, actually. And Calvin, this one's for you. Michelle asks, do you think that the MSM are talking the number of people getting cancer up to try and push a new mRNA vaccine?
100%. And we've seen, just as we saw with heart conditions, they've said, oh, eating chocolate can give you a heart condition. Breathing fresh air can give you a heart condition. Drinking one glass of, we saw all these articles coming out about heart conditions when we knew what was causing heart problems. We're seeing the same thing with cancer now. And we're seeing actually a vast number of public people with cancer too. And I think there's going to be a push for this mRNA, which we've heard about. If the next question is, will you take it? No, I will not be taking it, just as I didn't take the other mRNA jab. I won't even call it a vaccine.
Tracy Collins asks, should Justin Welby resign?
Yes, absolutely. Immediately. He's done so much damage to the church that I don't know how it is possible to fix it. He should step down. What he should do is, I've been saying for so long, if he thinks that the church is institutionally racist and there should be more black people in the church, well, he should try and get an African to stand for Archbishop of Canterbury, or someone that's solid in their faith, really orthodox, and is not going to be corrupted by wokeness from the Islington elite.
Perhaps it would be the best thing he could do this Easter, actually, to save the sanctity of the church.
I don't know if he knows it's Easter. He's talking about Ramadan every week, so...
Yeah, goodness me. They had the Palestine flag up, didn't they?
Don't.
Glenn asks, what do you think of Bojo joining GB News, and how do you think it would affect chances of being a Tory leader again in the future? Do you want to take that one, Calvin?
I'm not convinced he has joined GB News. I don't know what deal he's signed, but I don't think he's going to have his own show. He might potentially cover a bit here and there or pop on as a commentator. I can't see Boris Johnson presenting a show on GB News. I don't know. Maybe you have better information than I do, Dan.
Well, he's done one little video so far. I've been told that he is planning to film. I think the problem often with Boris is pinning him down. Do you know what I mean? He's a bit of a last minute guy, but it'll be very interesting to see. I know they want him to be part of the election night coverage. Darren asks, and Calvin, this one has made me so mad. What is Calvin's thought on Easter eggs being renamed as gesture eggs? And could you believe, Calvin, that they've now taken the cross of hot cross buns at some supermarket chains?
I know this is prime Dan Wootton content. I've been waiting for this. I mean, what is the point of a hot cross bun without the cross? It's just a bun, surely, and you can already get buns. The whole point of it is it's a Good Friday memorabilia. In fact, for many years in the country, it was illegal to sell them on any day that wasn't Good Friday. Same with Easter eggs. What's the point of an Easter egg if it's not an Easter egg? It's just a bit of chocolate. Like, what's a gratuitous egg for? A gratitude egg. What's the purpose of it? And so what they're doing is they're removing Christ from these things, removing Christianity from these things. Why? Diversity, inclusion, and equality. Any other faith, any other culture except our own. If you want to celebrate other cultures, okay, but let's at least celebrate our own as well.
Jan Kitchen has just made a good point, Calvin. She's picked me up. She says Leilani Dowding also says she stopped appearing on GB News. She absolutely did. Leilani has been a huge support, and so too did June Slater, actually, who will not go on GB News.
Yep, Leilani Downing and Samantha Smith both said, I saw in a tweet recently, that they're not going on GB News anymore. I love them for that.
Yes, and Ava as well,
yes.
Who didn't go on after the situation with Mark Stein. So there are a few good people on that front. Christopher,
I had a catch up with Angela Levin recently as well. I want to point out, I love her too, and she's been sidelined by them quite a bit.
Yeah, she's a really good woman. Christopher asks, do either of you think that Reform UK will be able to replace the Tories? I mean, look, it's not easy, is it, Calvin? It's not easy, but there is certainly, I think, an opportunity to at least help reshape the right and push the Conservatives in the direction they need to be going. But it's difficult under our electoral system.
I don't think Reform are doing that. I think Reform are exactly the same as the Conservatives. I think that what they want to be is the establishment, so they're not going to challenge the establishment. If we look at what Richard Tice has done over the last few weeks, any single candidate that said anything slightly right-wing has been cancelled and dropped immediately. You know, Hope Not Hate send out a tweet saying this is a Reform candidate. What does he do? He doesn't back them up. He gets rid of them. That's not the kind of leader I want to see. And Richard is a friend, and I'm still saying this. I think he's poor leadership for Reform. It's not good. If they're the challenge to the right, then there is no right.
I think Reform has a decent chance, you know. I think Reform has a decent chance. They are not a perfect movement, but what movement is going to be perfect? I think what's clear is that there does have to be competition for the Tory party on the right, because it's not good enough, these splinter groups from within the Conservative Party trying to unsuccessfully pressure wet cabinet ministers and wet prime ministers time after time. So look, one thing I'm actually going to be doing on Outspoken is covering Reform. I'm a critical friend, I think you would say, Calvin, because what you don't get from the mainstream media is honest coverage of Reform. They want to pretend they almost don't exist. I'm sorry, they are currently the third biggest political party in this country. So that doesn't mean that the coverage needs to be fawning, but you can't just ignore them and pretend that they're not a big part of the current landscape.
They could have a better chance if they picked a better leader. And I think Lee Anderson's just moved over there, so he'd be a good shout, actually. He is someone who understands the red wall.
Well, it was interesting. I ran a poll the other day on Outspoken, and it was about who people would like to see as the Reform leader. Had so many votes. And unfortunately for Richard, he was actually down the bottom. Nigel was at the top. Yeah. But I think it was Ben Habib who was actually the second choice. A lot of people really like Ben, and I think he'll play a big part in their election campaign. But the one thing I'd say about Richard, he doesn't have an ego. He knows he's not a big showman, and he is prepared to let these other people take a significant role. And the other thing is, Calvin, if Nigel were to return, he would happily pass the leadership baton back to him and become chairman. So I think Richard does deserve some credit, because everyone always says it's Nigel's party, but actually he's been doing all of this work for the past 2 years and has put them in this good position.
That's fair play. And I do like Richard personally. I just don't think he's a strong enough leader. But I think if Nigel did step in, then Reform would have a solid chance of making a real impact. And like you say, maybe it'll be a last-minute transfer.
Tracy Collins in the live Q&A. My goodness, Tracy, I'm so glad you've asked this. Is Mayor Khan a harmful individual for London? Well, Calvin, I have to start with that because this guy has destroyed the greatest city on earth. I used to love living in London. And I promise you, and I'm not just saying this isn't hyperbole. Now that I'm no longer tied to having to present from the GB News studio in Paddington, my future is not in London. For practical reasons, I am going to launch the show here. We're actually building a studio, and I need to be in London for a little while, but not long term. London is unsafe. It's broken as a capital city. There is a dark edge to it. And I'm sorry, people who say there are not no-go zones in London need to try walking around Whitechapel Station. There are. There aren't even signs up in English in Whitechapel now, Calvin.
It makes me sad, but I entirely agree with you. And I've not liked London for the last few years, but I felt called to be here, and I no longer have that feeling. I'm going to be leaving myself too. I don't feel safe here. I feel like my life could end any day.
Yeah,
around London, especially with the things that I say in the media, and that's not a good place to be. And it's a lot of that is Sadiq Khan's fault. Everything has gotten worse, especially knife crime. And at the same time, the police are dancing in rainbow gear and arresting people for hate speech when there are people being stabbed to death all the time and nothing's happening about it.
I know, it's really
Don't get me started on
disturbing.
The congestion charge and the ULEZ and all the nickel and diming common folk from this capital who can't afford to live here anymore and have to travel in and then have to pay out the nose to travel in. It's all upside down.
The thing is, Calvin, what makes me upset is that there's an election. There's actually a chance to change this. And for the second election cycle in a row, the Conservative Party has given up before the election. They've just given up. They haven't properly backed Susan Hall. And let me tell you, they did exactly the same thing with Sean Bailey, who was a superstar panelist on Dan Wootton Tonight on GB News. And he ran Sadiq Khan close. And he could have beaten Sadiq Khan if he had had proper support from the Conservative Party. So the Conservatives just give up. And the media narrative around Susan Hall is completely unfair. She is a good woman. She has the right beliefs. And look, she might not be the most telegenic person in the world, but actually we need someone to save this city. So don't give up. Fight.
100%.
But the Conservative Party have given up already. So what? We're just going to give this city away to Sadiq Khan for 5 more years. It makes me furious.
I don't understand their motivation. So both Sean and Susan are friends of mine that I've known for many years. I think they're both very sound, very good. Both of them would have made a great mayor of London. But the CCHQ are not backing them. But that's only part of the problem. The Conservatives have been in government for 14 years. If they wanted to get rid of the position of the Metropolitan Mayor of London, they could do, but they don't. So they clearly, for some reason, want Sadiq in power. What that is, I don't know.
Mal asks an interesting question, Calvin, because of course, the media is changing a lot. There's a big independent revolution coming. And Mal asks, will Talk TV's move online only mean they're trying to avoid the Ofcommunists, or is there another reason? And I actually think, Calvin, it's not to do with Ofcom because they are still going to be regulated because they're a radio station.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's to do with Ofcom either. I think what we're seeing here is that legacy media is dying, particularly television is dying. I think we got out at a good time, actually. Viewership numbers are dropping across the board. And I mean, when you've got just so few people watching and everyone's fighting for that same number of people watching, it's a dire market to be in. And then people are seeing at the same time, numbers online are growing dramatically. You know, whenever I did a show, even if it was a good show with good ratings, the viewers I got online were so much more than the viewers I got on live on television. And people are seeing that. Advertisers are starting to see that. Money is starting to shift from legacy media to online media. And at the same time, these puppet masters who've had so much influence over us for so long through the mainstream media are thinking, well, we need to get in on that too. You know, the Rupert Murdochs of the world need a hand in online independent media as well, if that's the way things are going.
The mainstream media is dead. It's on its deathbed. It is dying. And I don't just say this because of what's happened to me, because I'm very open about the fact, Calvin, I wasn't planning to leave GB News. What my plan was to see through the election. I wanted to be there for the election. I thought I could have made a real difference during the election campaign. And I wanted to be there for the first few months of a Labour administration. After that, though, Calvin, I was absolutely conscious that I was going to have to go independent. If you look at all of the big media personalities in the US, they are no longer on Fox News, because the only way that you can really say what you think and that you cannot be controlled opposition is to be independent. We've seen Candace Owens has just split from the Daily Wire this week. We've seen it with Tucker Carlson. We've seen it with our friend Megyn Kelly. We've seen it with Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly. And my media consumption, Calvin, is now almost entirely independent. I'll read the odd story online from a newspaper. I'll look at the odd clip, but I don't trust what I'm being fed by the MSM. And actually, that's the reason why I've been so determined to create this new outspoken daily show. I'm going to be daily, Monday to Friday. And the reason I'm doing that, it's a lot of work. It's going to be tough. And lots of people say I'm crazy, but it's because the independent media has to provide genuine news. So obviously you're doing brilliant work at Lotus Eaters. You've got a weekly show there, Your Common Sense Crusade. You're doing a weekly show with Lawrence Fox. But I need to provide breaking news every day, because people at the moment still feel like they have to tune in to Sly News or GB News, and they shouldn't have to do that.
That's a very good point. You know, I don't turn my TV on anymore. I consume all my media online. But you make a good point. There is still a whole demographic of people that think I have to tune in to find out what the news is today. And so where do they tune in? Well, they tune into the controlled opposition, or they tune into the mainstream media. Well, they shouldn't have to. And it's great to hear that you're going to have a daily opportunity for people to tune into something that's truthful.
Now, Diana asks, what is your take on the Prince Harry and P. Diddy lawsuit? Why is Harry's name mentioned and not others? Well, Calvin, I'll kick off on this because I was actually the first mainstream journalist in the world yesterday to reveal the court papers where Prince Harry was named. The reason I did that is because this guy, Harry, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, led an unsuccessful witch hunt against me with Byline Times, where he gave me absolutely no chance for a right of reply, no concept of due process or being innocent before proven guilty. Now, of course, I've since been completely exonerated. And I thought, well, Harry, if you're going to put me through that, you should also be exposed. I'm not saying he's guilty of anything, Calvin, but these are very serious allegations. He has been named in the papers. I thought the public had a right to know. And I was heartened to see that the mainstream media, who had completely ignored the story, did end up eventually picking it up. Although, by the way, you could see who Harry and Meghan's stooges in the British media are. So Chris Shipp, the royal editor of ITV, he didn't mention a word about it, and neither did Obed Scobie. You know, he's that odd little bloke, the weird-looking guy who writes all of those books about Harry and Meghan. In terms of P. Diddy...
Harry and Meghan.
In terms of P. Diddy himself, the jury is out on this one for me, Calvin. I'm still researching, I'm reading, but I'm also talking to people who know P. Diddy. And I spoke to one of his good friends earlier who believes this is a setup. And she said to me that she was at many of these parties, and that the only time there would be anyone young there was when they were friends with P. Diddy's children, and his children were always at those parties. So I'm very conscious not to rush to judgment here. Candace Owens, for example, has pointed out that P. Diddy could be the fall guy to cover up some sort of bigger sex ring in the entertainment industry. So I don't know where you stand on it, Calvin, but I'm not quite ready to declare P. Diddy guilty at this point.
I think that's a sensible stance, but my position is that I think probably both are true, and we'll soon see. I think he probably is being used as a fall guy or a cover guy to take a lot of the heat for the wider ring of dodginess that's going on in that circle, but there's certainly a lot of dodginess going on in that circle. And I've had suspicions about Puff Daddy for a long time. I remember the videos of him and Justin Bieber when Justin Bieber was very young, and Puff Daddy was like, you haven't called me and we haven't hung out like we used to. And I'm thinking, what do you mean you haven't hung out? He's a kid. And what do you mean like you used to? How young was he? And then, of course, there's the whole P. Diddy and Usher thing. And I don't know, I have my suspicions, but innocent until proven guilty.
And P. Diddy did, of course, have the guardianship of Usher at one point during his early days in the music industry. Suzanne Sear asks, is there any hope Prince Harry can ever get removed from the line of succession? Could we not send him to the moon on a privacy jet, even just to stop him talking? Well, I think the second part of that question is very, very funny. But I'm sure Prince Harry would find a way to moan even if he was on the moon, Calvin. In terms of the line of succession, I don't think there is a way to change that. Do you?
It would need a parliamentary act, and I don't think the government have the gumption to do anything like that. So I don't think it's possible, not with the current government. But with a Labour government who are Republicans, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't think Keir Starmer cares about the royal family. So if the British public let him know that we don't want Harry in the line of succession, it might be a possibility.
Anne Marie asks, do you think King Charles made a mistake by claiming to be a defender of all faiths?
I do. I think he tried to fix what he said there at his coronation. I'm not sure he succeeded, especially when he had on the way out of the cathedral, he had Sikh and Hindu and this and that, and trying to play the diversity game at a time when you don't need to. You know, I'm obviously someone who's against diversity, but even for people who are in favor of it, you don't need to have it all the time in all places. Now, a coronation of a king in a Christian cathedral is an explicitly Christian ceremony. So I think people will be quite forgiving if there's no Sikh or Hindu representation or Muslim representation. It's just unnecessary. It just looks silly. And so I think he's a little bit too woke in that regard.
Alan Duncan, who's a big supporter, Calvin, asks whether I think Labour will bring back ISIS fighters like Shamima Begum from Syria to the UK. He says, I think they will, and there will be zero trials held. And I actually think Alan is completely right. The problem with slippery Starmer, Calvin, is you cannot trust a word this guy says. Do you remember? He actually went on Sly News and said that it was wrong that Shamima Begum wasn't allowed to return to the UK. Then he obviously got advice from his advisors saying, stop saying that. It's very unpopular. And he did a complete 180. So, no, I don't trust Labour when it comes to Shamima Begum. I think they may well bring her back, or at least they would bring other lower profile ISIS fighters back to the country. And I completely disagree with that. Where do you stand, Calvin?
My position on this has changed. So last time we had this chat on your show, I said that actually she's our problem and we should bring her back and try her and put her in prison. But actually at this point, I think that if someone leaves this country to commit a terrorist act against this country, then they should not be allowed back in. So my position has evolved.
A couple of quick media questions. Wayne asked Calvin, what are your thoughts on foreign ownership of The Spectator and the Daily Telegraph?
Oh, it's quite concerning because the centre-right of British politics has an external influence on it. You may remember when I left GB News, I was concerned that there was going to be one particular person who was going to have too much influence on centre-right media in this country. And now it seems it's a foreign influence. I want a free press. And as long as these investors are not having any editorial say, it should be okay. But if they editorialize or push the papers in certain directions, then we're in trouble.
Ian Gribben asks, do you pay your BBC license fee?
No, haven't paid it in years.
See, I do, and it makes me so angry. But I'll tell you why. I'm very, very honest about it. I'm not someone who chooses to ever break the law. And I watch terrestrial television. I watch very little BBC, but I want to turn on my actual TV and be able to watch shows that happen to be on ITV or whatever it is. I don't watch much, but every now and then I do. And it makes me so angry, and which is one of the reasons why I campaign to get rid of it.
Fund the BBC.
Yeah, AJ asked, and of course, this is something that really has been escalated by the coverage from Candace Owens in the US over the past few weeks. What are your thoughts about the French president's wife being a man? So this is Brigitte Macron. Have you followed this story?
No, this has gone way over my head. What?
Yeah, so I have followed it. So I was actually listening to Candace talk about this earlier today. She is convinced that Brigitte is actually her brother. Now, look, who knows? I haven't done any major research into the story. I know lots of French journalists have. I do think what's obviously so fascinating about their relationship in a really concerning way is that she was his teacher. And he was so much younger than her. And Calvin, if that was reversed,
oh, I know. I've always found
that was an older
creepy.
man with his young female student, people would be having a real issue with that, wouldn't they?
That's a major safeguarding concern. Many boundaries were blurred there. It's creepy as hell. But I hadn't heard this about her potentially being I've just Googled and found that she's suing the people who are saying it, so we should probably be careful. But I hadn't seen anything about that.
Yeah, no, indeed. And look, final question before I get to a more general one about the news. Autumn Rimmer asks, what does Calvin think of the chemical attack having a Muslim burial even after he converted to Christianity just to get into the country? This is, of course, the Clapham acid attacker, Calvin, who ended up jumping, so we're led to believe, into the River Thames.
I think it probably wasn't a genuine conversion. So if that's what the family want to do, fair play. I think we have to be very careful with these conversions and these baptisms. We've seen so many, especially in the Church of England, failed asylum seekers who've suddenly converted in order to get a new petition and to gain asylum in the country, and that's a dodgy route to be taking. And I feel like the Church of England has let us down, the Home Office have let us down, and the whole system has, because so many of these failed conversions end up in terrorist acts.
And Mary asks, what does Calvin think of reports that Prince William is reluctant to become head of the Church of England and that he isn't much of a spiritual person?
Shame, because this could be the end of the country. Like, there's no physical way to separate the supreme governor of the Church of England from the position of the king, of the sovereign. It would mean disestablishmentarianism. It would mean separating church and state. But our church has its tendrils in every element of our state, from our armed forces to our parliamentary system to our judiciary, legislative, to the sovereign himself. So I don't know what would happen if he said he didn't want to be supreme governor of the Church of England, unless we became a Catholic again.
Okay, and we've got two final questions. David, first up. David, what's your question? Thank you for being with us tonight.
Hi, great to see you again. It's not so much a question, it was just I put my hand up as soon as Calvin said he doesn't pay for his TV license. I'm totally with him on that. I don't watch TV anymore. It's just full of rubbish. So well done.
Good on you. Thank you, David. I mean, yeah, that's a big issue, the BBC license fee. And our good friend, who I was sitting next to at your ordination, Calvin, near the end of last year, Charlie Sansom. Charlie, what's your question?
Hello, guys. Great to see you doing your thing on your own terms. Absolutely fantastic. I've got a question for you guys about the monarchy as a whole. Now, Dan, I know that you are a big fan of the monarchy, and Calvin, I know you hold His Majesty King Charles I in high regard, based on some of the things that I've seen you post. Now, the question I have for you guys is, do you think the constitutional monarchy is perfect the way it is, or do you think that the monarch should have more political power?
Well, I guess I would say I don't think it's perfect, because what is, and no system is going to be perfect. Do I think it's better than the alternative, which I think would mean President Tony Blair or President Gary Lineker? Absolutely. But in terms of political power, Calvin, absolutely not. I mean, Charles and William too, they're actually pretty woke on a lot of issues. And I think sometimes, and look, I'm a monarchist, so I say this as a royalist. I guess, like with the Reform Party, I say this as a critical friend. But stay out of environmental issues, for example. Stay out of the push to net zero. Do what your mother did, Charles, and then you'll be the great king that we need, because we have enough political leaders. We don't need a political leader. What we need is a rock for this country. What do you reckon, Calvin?
I'm not sure I entirely agree. First of all, good to see you, Charlie. I'm not a fan of King Charles at all. I pray for him a lot because I don't like him and I think he's making mistakes and I want him to do better. But I am a monarchist, a massive monarchist. I would prefer an absolute monarchy, but I prefer an absolute monarchy with a king who puts the country first. And at the moment, we have a globalist, unfortunately, and I think he's a very confused fellow. Yes, he gets into the environmental stuff a lot, but he also opens the WEF, and it's like, what are you doing? For goodness sake, England first, the United Kingdom first. If we had a good, solid, Christian, proud to be British king, I would absolutely be in favor of an absolute monarchy to get rid of these woke, silly, centre-left parliamentarians.
Now, look, I wanted to end with a question from Jeanette Stone, because I think it's a really important one, Calvin, that you can take your time with. She says, how is this all going to end? Are we on the right going to be able to correct the West?
I can give you an answer, but I don't think it's going to be a positive one.
Just be honest. Be honest.
No, we're not. The West is doomed. The West has been imploding quite slowly for 100 years, and it has sped up in the last few years. The West has been falling apart since the World Wars. It hasn't recovered from the World Wars. If we look at what's happened in England, we lost our empire. We gave up all our resources to fight fascism, which was a good thing to do, but it cost us dearly. So the empire died, and then Britain has been dying too because we gave up our values. We realized, or our politicians realized, that there was the birth rates were declining, and that we didn't have enough workers, and they focused on GDP rather than focusing on building a good country. And because they focused on the economic side of things, they thought, how do we solve this declining birth rate and lack of resources? Well, we import. And so they've been importing immigrant non-stop ever since the Second World War. And as a result, we've seen our country has changed dramatically. Our culture has been eroded. At the same time as this, a lot of people lost their faith, probably because of the dire situations of the world wars. And so without the faith, without the values, the country's been falling apart. Without the resources, the empire has fallen apart. And then we look across the water to America, and we see it's not much better over there. We've relied on America to be our arm, to be our big brother, essentially. So we haven't had to look after ourselves. Since the World Wars, we haven't had the military might that we used to have. And so we've relied on America to be the military might of the West. And America has been imploding at the same time. Wokeness has been taken over because they've obsessed on their secularism. And as a result, without America, without Great Britain, there is no West. No matter what people think about the rest of Europe and Australia, New Zealand, it has been, up until the last 100 years, it has been Great Britain that has been the West. And for the last 100 years, it's been America that has been at the forefront of the West. And with both of those on the way out, and China and Russia on the way up, I don't think there's a way that the West can recover.
Really scary times, really scary times. But look, Calvin, it's been a joy reuniting with you.
It's been good to be back, Dan.
We have risen. But no, look, I know this weekend is really important for you. What's your Easter schedule? How much are you working? Do you take time for personal worship? Talk me through it.
Oh, it's absolutely insane. I've been planning like 5 services today, and I've got all this stuff going on, but it's going to be wonderful. For people that are interested, on Good Friday, we have a Passion service that takes place at 3 p.m. On Easter Saturday, for Holy Saturday, there's an Easter Vigil at 8 p.m. to see in Easter. And then on Easter Sunday in the morning at 10 a.m., we've got the main Easter Sunday service. And people often think that Christmas is the main time of the year for Christians, but no, Easter is the main time. This is the big deal. If people want to come along, all you viewers are welcome. Christchurch, Harlesden, it'd be wonderful to see you. Don't have to bring anything but yourself, and turn up and sing some songs and praise the Lord.
Well, look, that's why I wanted to talk to you this week, Calvin. But look, on a serious level, thank you so much for your loyalty to me over the past 6 months. You had to deal with a lot for something that you had no involvement in. And that's because you are a good man. You are a loyal man. You put your principles before money or before fame. But what I'm so excited about now is it means we're on this journey of independence together. I know you've got your own Substack going on, which I really recommend everyone follows. Or if you're watching this via Calvin's Substack, then please also follow Dan Wootton Outspoken. But there's going to be lots of opportunities for us to collaborate over the weeks and months to come. And I'm very excited to announce you're going to be a regular guest, aren't you, on the Outspoken Daily
honestly,
Show.
I can't wait. I've missed it. This is great to be back on your show, Dan. It is wonderful. And thank you for thanking me, but it's honestly not necessary. This is what friends are for. This is what friends do. And I know I've had a bit of a moan about people that didn't stand up, but I hope by standing up, I've set an example for them so that next time they'll think, actually, this is my friend. You know, Dan got me into this. I should stick up for him, or whoever it is at the time, because that's what we need. More friends who are loyal to each other, more people that stand up for their principles. Forget the fame, the fortune. On your deathbed, none of it will matter. You won't think, oh, I wish I had worked an extra 30 hours, or I wish I had more people follow me on Twitter. You'll be thinking, I wish I was a better friend to that person.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you've definitely taught me is we can always strive to be better. You know, the last 6 months has been a real opportunity for me to reflect, for me to think about some of the things I did, to admit actually that I got things wrong and that I was far from perfect. But also, unfortunately, to see that in industries like that, there are a lot of people who are only there for themselves, and actually you have to cherish those true friendships, those real relationships. Do everything you can to keep your family close, your old friends close, because when the chips are down, they are the ones that are on the whole really there for you. But thank you, Calvin. I have to thank everyone who has been part of the Outspoken community from day one. We are already a force. I am so excited about it. This is the first of many town halls, and I just want to say, stick with me over the next few weeks. There will be lots of content, but we're still in a soft launch phase because getting the Daily Show up and running is a big endeavor, but it's your support that is enabling me to do that. So I couldn't be more grateful. Message me, keep in touch with me. What I love about this Substack platform is that the relationships are very personal. I can have those chats with you. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for your support of Outspoken, and thank you so much to Calvin Robinson.
Thank you. God bless.
Happy Easter.